I am speaking now with Greg Gicewicz, founder and CEO of Compliance Shark, and we're going to be talking about linen and laundry services. And you may not realize just how important this is to infection prevention. Greg, thanks so much for coming on to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, Greg, tell us a little bit about your background. You have an interesting path. And I think one of the things you probably 30 years ago, 40 years ago, never thought that this would be, your business and what you do. And so walk us through how you wound up at Compliance Shark, and then we'll talk about the company itself.
Great. Yeah, thanks for asking that. So oddly enough, I worked in software for most of my professional life for 20 years. I worked for Microsoft for my last 13 years of my career. And when it was time to retire, I did what any logical software executive would do, and that is buy a healthcare laundry in Tumwater, Washington. I'm being a little facetious with that. My wife and I literally walked into this business. It looked like a good family community business, which it was, but knowing nothing about this. And it was kind of an odd thing. I walked in and said, "Do I want to do this?" And I worked undercover on the soil sort, which is kind of one of the dirtiest jobs you could ever have. It's in the middle of the night, and the workers were thinking, "My God, who is this really slow, horrible guy? He should be fired. I can't believe he's looking for this job." But I did that purposefully just to really get down and dirty and see what this was all about. And it struck me, wow, this is really hard. One, this is really intricate. There's so many details about it too. And three is it's really important. One of those things that we don't think about, but it's really just a critical part of our communities and of our healthcare infrastructure to get this right. And so I did buy the little company. We were fortunate enough to grow it in 17 years tenfold, but learned so much in the process of how to do this right, how critical this is for hospitals, and really how challenging, intricate, and how underappreciated this whole thing is. So in 2023, about a year ago, I decided to get really involved in helping drive the importance and excellence in healthcare linen. Specifically, our focus is on the infection prevention compliance part of it. And while I was in the healthcare laundry, I became very active on the standards boards and the accreditation and the inspections of healthcare laundries, and you learned a lot about the need for this in the greater healthcare world.
It's interesting. There's kind of two factors here, right? Like this business in its own right was a lot for you to learn, but healthcare is also a different breed, and the considerations are very different than outside of healthcare and other industries. And I'm almost wondering, you said 17 years and you were very involved. How much did, as you were learning, how much did the industry also, in terms of standards and everything else, change over that time? It's almost like you had to have a baseline, but then you had to keep up with the changes. Is that part of the reason you got involved with all the standards work, was to just
It
stay
really is.
current?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question, because when I got in many years ago, I'm talking like an old guy now, but it was very different. There were much less rigorous standards. There was much less knowledge of what's going on. The hospitals were much more lax in this world, and it has really developed and matured and become safer and better in those 17 years. But I think we still have a long ways to go generally. And I think awareness and education are really the big words that I'm going to be throwing around a lot here.
Great. I'm going to walk us into talking a little bit about Compliance Shark, because you had mentioned you decided not too long ago to take what you learned and your involvement in the industry. Again, I think it's so important to be up and up on those standards. And it sounds to me like you're also continuing to drive more and more focus. So you got to educate the
Right.
people out there that are utilizing these services in healthcare, or maybe involved in that service delivery or the contracting itself, like many of the people listening to this podcast. But then on the other hand, once you get them to kind of understand the standards, you're also trying to educate them that we need to raise these standards. And so you're trying to build a groundswell, I can imagine, to um, really drive this forward. So I think that's interesting how you kind of went from, having the business to going around and supporting quality industry wide for all businesses in the linen space. So, tell me more about the purpose of Compliance Shark and how you're going to take your knowledge and kind of passion for this to help make an even bigger impact.
Okay. One of the things I really want to provide in like a high at a high level, one of the things we don't realize is just how critical and how ubiquitous linen is in healthcare. So, I think getting into this and I certainly thought, okay, I never gave this 1 ounce of thought. I go to the hospital, okay, maybe there's a gown, maybe it's washed in like your mother's washer, and it's dried, and we'll call it good. Everything is good. But what I learned is no, this is linen's literally everywhere. So I mean, you could go to your largest acute care hospital or a VA government hospital, but then you can go to surgery centers or long-term care, or you can go to your smallest physical therapy place, and or you can even go within these places, whether you're in the kitchen, the emergency department, the ICU, the surgical centers, the birthing centers. Everywhere linen is used. And the other thing that's kind of odd, which we don't really think about, is everybody knows the largest organ on the human body is it's the liver, right? No, it's the skin. It's kind of a it's kind of an odd fun fact in this. And if you think about it, in healthcare, you have immunosuppressed people with something covering the entire part of their skin. And if there's a wound, or if that linen is infected or contaminated, that's a really big and dangerous deal. And we really have to get this right.
Greg,
So
I want to add on to that just with my nursing experience. We kind of know and we learn in school that the skin is the number one protective barrier against infection and also the
right.
transmission, right, of infection or a mode of transmission anyway. And the contamination piece is so critical. But you're right. If there's any compromise to skin integrity, like that's a number one threat to potential for infection. And obviously there's a lot of focus on healthcare acquired infections these days. It's tied to reimbursement, and I
Absolutely.
think it's really great that you level set on, hey, skin integrity is a serious concern in healthcare. And you got people with bed sores, right? And then all of a sudden you're putting a
Right.
gown over them and they're in the hospital bed and they're with sheets. Like these are all touching those surfaces, and any patient who's got compromised skin integrity is at risk. I even as a nurse haven't thought about linen in that equation. I thought about many other things but not linen.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. When you look at it like that, it really makes you think about how critical this is. And this is what I think is kind of scary and almost disturbing. And I really like to get the word. I mean, I don't obviously we don't want to scare everybody into, oh my gosh, this is just a catastrophe impending that's happening. But that being said, when we really look at this honestly, getting linen clean, it's pretty hard, but it's time, temperature, chemistry, and mechanical action. And if you do that right, you're gonna get it clean. We've been doing that for thousands of years. We kind of get that. But then if you look at a hygienically clean piece of linen, let's say a towel coming out of the washer, the things that have to happen from outside, from coming out of the washer to touching the patient, boy, there's a lot of opportunities for contamination of that
So
towel.
this is a
And if you look
logistics
at the
thing.
litter,
You're pointing
it
out the
really is.
logistics
Yeah.
concerns with this. And I'm assuming your team at Compliance Shark has a lot of logistics experience then in this area.
Yeah, we do. And one of the things we have at Compliance Shark, which is kind of unique, and I thought I think we're the only company in the world that does this, is if you're on the infection prevention side or the nursing side, you care about infection prevention and you care about nursing and patient care, and you're deep diving in that world. You might touch on linen a little bit, but there's so much depth and so much rigor to doing linen properly that we really want to help the infection prevention world get educated and help them do this. Now, let's flip the thing. If you're in the healthcare laundry world where I've been for the last 17 years, you're buried in operations. You're buried in let's get this out and logistics. Let's hire the people. Let's get trucks. Let's get our washers going. Let's get the flow through the plant. Okay, and you're just heads down on that. And yeah, infection prevention is important and we need to follow standards, but that's really not your focus. So what we're doing at Compliance Shark is we're trying to really marry the two. So we have operational experts. I don't want to call myself that, but I've been on the ground floor of this thing for a while. So I think anything you could possibly do wrong and have gone wrong in a
You've
healthcare
seen it.
laundry, I've done it. I've experienced that, and I would like to help people like not have to do that. But also, we have infection preventionists from that side of the world with lots and lots of experience helping us get that part of it right. And we even have a compliance attorney on staff that can help with those types of things as well.
And I want to ask you on this too. So the logistics piece, just as we define that, it's not just logistics once they get to the hospital and working with IP, on how maybe the linen product, so to speak, is being distributed through the healthcare organization. You're also helping to evaluate the suppliers and their logistics practices before it even hits the dock. Is that correct? Like your broad scale?
Exactly right. I mean, I think really a good way to look at that is think of logistics in a hospital, and what do you think about? You think of internally all the logistics activities that are happening in the hospital. Well, your laundry, whether it's on premise or OPL as we call it, or off site, outsource laundry, that's an integral part of the logistics of your entire hospital and your entire hospital supply chain and all that. And it really needs to be looked at and approached as an extension of the hospital itself.
Hmm. Now, I cut you off. You were kind of explaining the legal piece, which is also something that is shocking to me. Like, you would actually need legal counsel. Is it simply a contractual thing, or are there more considerations there?
I mean, I think this is another thing that's sort of an eye opener. And if you look in the compliance world, part of the compliance world, a huge part of the compliance world is just around protection, and it's protection through developing the right policies, developing the right standards, developing the right processes around those policies and training and proof of execution and all those. And if those aren't done in a compliant manner, then not only are you opening yourselves up for contaminated linen, which is in itself a big issue, but you're opening yourselves up for all kinds of legal issues for not having done this properly in the first place. And that's a meticulous, rigorous being in itself that we want to get right, because although it may sound rigorous and expensive, if you're on the other end of it and you are in a lawsuit, or you are in an HAI situation, or you are in some other situation, whether as the laundry or whether as the hospital or whether in between, that gets really expensive, really ugly, really, really fast. And we really want to prevent that in the most economical, efficient way that we can. And Compliance Sharp will help you get on top of these things and make sure these things don't happen, which is the way to go.
What are some qualifiers there? What questions should people be asking themselves, to figure out whether or not they need a consultation? Like, what are some key identifiers? Like, hey, these are the common complaints that come up all the time, and it says there's an opportunity for improvement here, and we need to reduce that risk. And I'm also thinking, just related to that, policies and procedures, some of these questions are, you have the policies and procedures in place, but you're not exactly following them. So you're opening yourself up to an even greater gap, because if you have a policy you're not following, then it really can hurt you. It's one thing to say I didn't know. It's another thing to say we do and we didn't do.
Yeah, great. I mean, how many times in life, and certainly in healthcare and certainly in the laundry world, do we have what I call, from my Microsoft days, shelfware? And this is just the policy that's sitting on it's sitting on someone's bookshelf. And then when the inspector comes in, the accreditation inspector, maybe at the hospital, you bring it out. And then the last time this thing was updated was like 15 years ago, and there's no training on it and all that. Yeah, we definitely don't want to go there. We want these policies to be active, living, breathing documents that are helping us run our operations the most effective way possible. That's why they're there. And the policies are not, they really cover, uh, they cover the training world, they cover the logistical world, they cover the operational world, they cover obviously the compliance world, but these are really the whole blueprints for how we're running everything. And they're very, very, very important parts of the DNA of how we operate as a healthcare system or as a laundry or as both.
Mm. So yeah, what kinds of questions should people be asking to figure out if there's an opportunity here?
So I think the that's really interesting that you put it that way, because I think the situation now, I would call it the black box of healthcare laundry. So the normal thing would be, how's your health, if you were to say, or if I were to say, hey Justin, in your hospital, how's the healthcare laundry looking? You might say, I think everything's okay. I don't know. I've never really thought about it that much, or maybe I thought
I think
about
a
it, but
lot of people are
other
going to say
people
that
do
listening to
that.
this podcast.
Right. But the question that I would ask is, the first question I would ask is your linen hygienically clean? Simple question. And I think the most answer you'd get would be, I don't know. Well, does it look clean? Yeah, sometimes, but we have some dirty. Does it smell clean? Yeah, sometimes, but we have some dirty in there. Do I have the items that I need when I need them? Uh, how's your healthcare laundry performing? How are your standards in the hospital for protecting the integrity of the linen from contamination? And what I would do, I think a great test which you can do is take linen from a closet or in a hospital or right before patient use. And again, I'm not just talking acute care hospital, I'm talking residents in nursing homes, or I'm talking linen used in a surgery center, or any other
Yeah,
healthcare thing, and have
clinic
it.
settings. Yeah, that non-acute.
Exactly right.
Absolutely.
Yep. That's exactly right. And have that microbiologically tested to see what kind of contamination is on it. Just as, and you're going to find things, but I think just as a baseline, knowing, wow, I didn't know that there were Mucorales spores on this, which were found on 10, in one study in 2019, there were Mucorales, I hope I'm getting that pronunciation right, spores on 10% of the linens. And I think 33% of the linens were visibly unclean. And this is at 15 transplant and oncology hospitals. So if you think of Mucorales spores, those are what lead to uh, certain deadly diseases like mucormycosis, which actually have killed people in hospitals due to contamination from
And
that.
keep in
So
mind,
I'm,
in
I'm certainly not
oncology,
saying,
the patients are immunocompromised just as part of the
oh,
treatment.
absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's a great point. And same with transplant patients.
100%.
They're severely immunocompromised.
Yeah. So what about accreditation and certification? Like you mentioned being involved in industry standards. How does
Right.
that play into the companies that provide linen services? Is it a requirement? Is it optional? Like, what is the lay of the land around, if because we talk a lot in supply chain about cost, quality, and outcomes, right? So, I think it can be difficult to evaluate your linen contracts, sometimes too, because of all the variation in contracting styles and pricing. But on the quality side, I think that can often be a little elusive for people. And so that's why I asked this question is like, okay, I think there are standards that are, and there are policies and procedures, but what's really enforcing that? And what's a minimum that you should expect from a partner?
Yeah, great question, and something I'm actually really happy to hear that you're aware of those. That makes me very happy, because I know that we've been trying to drive awareness in that for many years. But there's an accreditation from a body called the Healthcare Laundry Accreditation Council, and very briefly, I don't want to go too deeply in that, but that is a voluntary accreditation where I think there's 650-ish standards that which is that's a huge number, as you can imagine. And there's every 3 years, inspectors, objective independent inspectors, will come and evaluate the laundry. They'll evaluate the documentation, the policies, the practices, the actual physical operation, the cleanliness, the knowledge of the staff, the protection, the transportation, the washrooms, all this sort of stuff. And it's a great thing. It's really elevated the excellence in the industry, and it's raised the bar, which is a good thing. There's a and it's very process based, meaning if you have the right wash processes, the right environmental cleaning processes, the right training processes, then there's a high likelihood that you're going to have the right
It sounds
outcomes.
a little like ISO to me, you know.
It is, yeah, it's very much like that. And this was based on lots of ISO and other healthcare standards, best practices, and governmental things that are out there from different bodies like an OSHA or like an AMI or like the CDC or the FDA, and all these types of things. And essentially what they did originally is they took all these things that touch healthcare linen, which I was a part of doing that, and then applied it mostly to infection prevention. So it's a good thing. And I must add also, there's also a certification by this organization called the Textile Rental Service Association, called Hygienically Clean. And here it's similar but a little bit different. And I don't want to go into the differences, but they have these best management practices that the laundry must follow. And this one is very outcome based, less process based. So in this one, they actually test the linen quarterly, and they have this hygienically clean standard where it's microbiologically tested, and the passing is if there are fewer than 20 colony forming units per square decimeter, it passes, and you have to keep doing this. The HLAC organization just implemented a similar thing, but they both exist, and these are great. They've helped the industry. They've helped us get better. But remember, you're responsible for your hospital, you're responsible for your hospital network, and it's really important. In fact, I think to have hospital accreditation, you have to inspect your laundry. And what I would urge people to do is get establish a very strong partnership with your laundry. And to paraphrase Ronald Reagan, maybe people are too young to remember, but I think he was the guy who said, trust but verify. So what I mean by that is, if someone's accredited or certified, that's awesome. That means they took the extra step. They went the extra mile to get their place standardized. But let's verify that. We need to inspect them ourselves, and we need to look at things for how they fit with our facility, and are they doing things in accordance with our standards, and are they doing their accreditation standards. Remember, if you're inspected once every 3 years, there's a lot that can go on in between then, and we want to make sure that every day is inspection day, which I used to like to say, not inspection day is inspection day.
Hospitals already do this in surgical services. There are, surgical instruments, and then there's the equipment, the capital equipment that sterilizes them. And while in the lab setting, they go through the FDA and, the 510K, if it's appropriate in that scenario. But it's exactly what you just said. Like, they get all those approvals, the manufacturers do, but the hospital still has to do some verification, right? So the validation studies happen in the manufacturing arena, and the verification happens at the hospital, but you don't necessarily see as regimented, maybe, or regular practice in that non-surgical setting for that verification. And it's interesting because you were talking earlier about tying infection prevention into this. Are they the ones that typically own the verification, or is there another department, or is it literally laundry themselves, like whoever, an EVS maybe that's overseeing that they are responsible for that? Is it a collaboration? How does this all come together, to ensure that there is that verification that's ensuring that, hey, what the laundry is certified that they do well is being done well in between every 3 year?
Yeah. So And this is, I think you hit on a really key point, and this is one of the key points in why we started Compliant Shark. So I think in a perfect world, uh, the laundry is doing everything perfectly. The laundry has processes in place, and they're validating those processes in how they produce their linen. And the infection preventionist with the hospital network or EVS or whoever's deemed to do that is well versed in what those standards, what those policies, what those validations are, and then they're asking for that regularly. So just to give you some kind of, I don't want to get too nerdy or too into the
You can get
weeds,
nerdy
but
here with me. I'll just say that.
okay, good,
But
yeah.
in the interest of time,
But I think that this is kind of a good illustration. So, okay, Justin, you're an infection preventionist, and I'm an accreditor from a hospital accreditation body. Justin, how's your linen? Is it clean? Okay, I'll just be you. Yeah, I think
of
it's
course
clean.
it's clean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clean. How do you know that? Well, they told me it was clean and it looks okay. Well, okay, can you show me the chemical formulas for each item? And can you show me the chemical titration records showing that those formulas have the right times and temperatures and pHs and chemistries and all those things? And you're monitoring those processes regularly to ensure the integrity of those formulas, which ensures the integrity of getting the linen hygienically clean. And then in the perfect world, you say, actually, I can. Here you go. This was done 2 weeks ago, and here's the titration, and here's the adjustments we made. And your accreditor will say, wow, this guy is just amazing. He knows everything. And that's sort of where we want to get to. And it's not just in wash formulas. It's show me your maintenance records.
Right.
Show me the proof that you're doing that. Show me your environmental cleaning records. Show me the proof that you're doing that. Show me your bloodborne pathogens training records and your vaccination records for Hep B or whatever of your employees. Oh, look, these were checked off. This guy was hired last week, and here's his beginning of the vaccination. So those are the things that we're really looking to, as you use the word validate, which is validation that we're doing things the right way. And I would say mostly this is we can do a better job here. And I think Compliance Shark can really help us get to that level that we need to get to every time, where every time the piece of linen is we have validated processes that are ensuring both at the laundry side, in between in the transportation, and in the hospital side, these things are happening to ensure the correct outcome every time.
Some health systems have a hybrid model where they're doing some laundry in-house and they're outsourcing, other.
Most.
Yeah, I was going to say most. But there are
Yep.
also some that are trying to do it. Maybe it's even in a co-op, but they're trying to take it totally internal. And so they may not
Right.
even realize, that they're now responsible for the validation and the verification simultaneously. And I'm assuming that brings a different level of risk and accountability around the compliance, right? Because while they're responsible for their suppliers, from a legal standpoint, there is some separation there. Once they're doing it internally, I would think that they would have an expert on staff, but that verification piece, I can see an area where Compliance Shark comes in as a third party, almost like an auditing methodology to say, hey, you've got kind of this internal view, but you really should have somebody outside of the organization now that you're taking on this like broad spectrum, full ops project on, or you've had it been going for a while, and have a third party sort of come in and make sure that there aren't any blind spots that you've missed because you built your operation around the knowledge that you have, and it may not take into consideration knowledge that you don't have.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And you alluded to the FDA, and one of the things that's very important, if you know the uh, good manufacturing practices with the FDA, one of the things that they say is we want our QA auditors to be totally independent of the operations people actually doing the work, because we don't want the fox guarding the henhouse, or you can use whatever cliche you want to use. But one of the another reason we form Compliance Shark, and I think this can be super helpful to hospitals, is hospitals you know what? They probably, a lot of people have the great knowledge around linen and about compliance and validation and things like that. But sometimes having a third party who's independent, who's objective, this is what they do. This is the only thing they focus on, auditing you to make sure you're doing things right. That can be a more effective model, and it can also be more effective. I'll give a good analogy. When I ran my laundry, if we were being audited by a hospital, or we were being audited by, let's say, HLAC, and they said, "Let me see your chemical stuff," and I said, "Oh, I do it myself, and here's all the stuff," they would say, "I don't know if this guy really knows the chemical stuff, and he's busy doing this other stuff." But conversely, if we have a professional chemical company in there doing the titrations, this is what they do. They're experts in this, and then they give that documentation with their name on it. They're independent. They're servicing us. For a hospital to have a company like Compliance Shark showing all those validation records and showing the training records and all the things I talked about, that can be very powerful, and a sign of real rigor in your compliance program that's going to make the auditors, but also the hospital, just give them a very, very, very good feeling that things are being done in a compliant manner.
Yeah, I can see the integrity not only in perception by people coming outside and sort of looking in, but also the actual integrity of the program and what that can bring. I know we're getting close to the end here, but one of the other things that you told me about Compliance Shark that sets you apart is just that you have a process that you have to be able to really support and consult, with your customer base. And so I'd like to walk through that process if you don't mind. Like, when somebody contacts Compliance Shark and says, I think we might need help, I'm not sure, but I would love to get a better idea or a better grip on things to just verify that this is what we think it is, or identify opportunities and start addressing them. What's the first step, and how does that whole experience flow for them?
Sure. So the first step, as in anything, would be, we would do an assessment, and it would be a basically a risk assessment of your entire keyword end-to-end linen program for the hospital. And I say end-to-end because end-to-end means patient use to patient use. And you might say, oh, that's not that big of a deal, patient use to patient use. But it's a really big deal, because that means it's used at the hospital, and there's a lot of risks with how it's disposed of and how it's moved to the loading dock and all that stuff. And you wouldn't think that, but that's like, wow, there's people at risk and other patients at risk in that hospital part. Then transporting that to the laundry, and then we would assess the laundry practices, assess the practices back to the hospital, and then assess the practices within the hospital and the risks, such as in the linen room, it doesn't have proper environmental controls, does it have proper personnel controls, then up to the patient floors, into the linen closet, and then into the patient room. So we would basically do a risk assessment for that entire end-to-end uh, life cycle, and call out what the different risks are. So, oh, at the laundry, we found that the carts weren't covered properly, or we found there wasn't a good hand hygiene policy, or in the hospital, oh, the airflow was incorrect in the
That's
linen room
huge.
or on the
That
loading
airflow
dock.
piece is
Oh yeah,
huge.
and it's everywhere. Or bringing it up to the patient floor, we found that the linen handler in the hospital hadn't washed his or her hands, or didn't practice hand hygiene, or the shelf where it was put in the hospital floor was actually made out of wood, and we know wood is a porous material that cannot be cleaned, so there's a potential for contamination right there. So we would go through that. It would take about a day, depending on the size of it. If it's a huge operation, it might take a little bit more than a day. But I think that would give us a really good, or that would give the hospital a good sense of, okay, here's where we are. And then we would have a good meeting of, these are the risks that we found, and here's what we can do to mitigate these risks, which could be everything from, okay, we're going to redo a couple policies, to we're going to retrain staff, or we're going to establish real training of this staff, to, oh, we need to redo some significant infrastructure, and there's a lot of problems at the laundry that we need to address, and this is the plan for that. So once that happens, there's a lot of different ways that we can go. One of the other things that I think can be really, really helpful is just to have what we call a compliance shark compliance subscription plan. And this would be once your QA compliance processes are in place, we would come in every quarter, every 6 months, every whatever you want, and then we would make sure that things are happening, make sure training's happening, make sure we have all those validation records that we need, make sure notifications are happening. And sometimes that can be a way to make sure inspections are happening, or we'll do the inspections if you want. But now all of a sudden your hospital's freed up to do other things, and that the linen part is pretty covered in terms of compliance activities. And it's not going to break the bank because it's done so infrequently with people who are very efficient and competent in doing this.
So, kind of my last question on this too is I'm imagining that there is some supplier management component to this, and helping manage those suppliers and maybe even some contractual sort of assessments and identifying some opportunities. Is that part of your program and services as well?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, it's funny you say that, because maybe we'll get into this later. But I'm actually writing a book on this entire thing, and I there's an entire chapter dedicated to finding the right supplier and managing the right supplier. Like, how do you do that? So that's absolutely a critical part of it, because if you don't have the right supplier, it doesn't matter. You're gonna, all bets are off. You're gonna fail in that. So choosing the right supplier ahead of time, the right way, is really a key part of success in the linen world in healthcare.
Did you ever imagine 20 years ago when you were working at Microsoft that you would write a book on linen and laundry services? I mean, that alone is I guess it's just telling about just how much opportunity there is and how much education is needed in this area. And I can tell you, for our supply chain audience, I think this is the third conversation I've had in the last 6 months around linen and laundry. And I feel like it was see no evil, hear no evil, like just really under the radar. And all of a sudden, this has become a major topic in the supply chain world. And so the fact that you're writing a book certainly validates that this is a concern out there. And I know that there are people listening that are going to be like, yeah, trying to understand how to manage these suppliers and assess quality and put KPIs in our contracts and how to do that, as well as evaluate savings and efficiencies opportunities. I mean, this is where healthcare is diving really deep these days. But linen can be so misunderstood. It can be mismanaged. And so having an expert like yourself or the folks on your team that not only consider the supply chain and the logistics components of this, but having that infection prevention consultation there, and having those experts and tying that together to ensure that the linen program is not leading to any of the rates of healthcare acquired infections, which we know hits the bottom line as well. I think I kind of summed up your services in the way I just said that, but I just think there's a major gap in need in this area, and I can tell that there's a lot of focus that's being shifted to it just based on the types of conversations I'm having nowadays.
Yeah, that's right. And Justin, I have to tell you, I wish I'd spoken to you earlier about this, because you just summarized chapter 5 of the book, which was about SLA management, yeah, and
I could be a
inspections and all that. And I was like,
co-author. I
wow, this
like
guy,
that.
he's really on
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah. So I'll put you in the acknowledgments there for that.
Well,
But
it sounds like you
that's
already
absolutely right.
wrote
Yeah,
it,
there.
so no need to acknowledge.
That's okay. Yeah,
But
we can do that
but
anyway.
that's kind of representative, because if we had this conversation a year ago, I would have known nothing. And this is just what I've learned because so many people have started to talk about it. And so, I want to let everybody know they can learn more about Compliance Shark by going to www.complianceshark.com. You can give them a call at 425-765-8894. You can follow them on LinkedIn as well. But Greg, I want to get them, kind of an email so that they can reach out directly, because they may be interested in scheduling an initial linen program risk assessment like you just described to us, and how that process goes. So do you want to throw out an email and maybe, kind of any additional information that might help people take that first step if they know that this is an area they need to be looking at?
Sure. Yeah. So my email, it's gregory@complianceshark.com. Again, gregory@complianceshark.com, or info@complianceshark.com. Or just go to our website and click start an assessment, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn directly. And again, that initial assessment can be a great thing to do. It's a short process, and it'll just give you an idea of, okay, this is what the world really looks like from an outsider perspective, and we can go from there. I think that can be super helpful for our audience there.
All right, Greg, this was a phenomenal interview. You are definitely packed full of information and knowledge in this area, and you speak very concisely on it. I can see why you say your team is very efficient and timely due to their expertise, and you learned a lot over those 17 years running laundry services. So I want to thank you so much for coming on, and just encourage anybody out there to reach out to you. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thank you, Justin, for having me. And I think it's great that we're doing this just to drive awareness and education. That's the best thing that we can all do. And ultimately, this is going to help the bottom line of patient safety, which is what we really care about in this world.